So I want to welcome everybody to today's VANTEC meeting. It's a special spotlight on life sciences and health tech. And we've got some great people, very knowledgeable experts who will talk about this topic. There's a lot going on in this industry sector and a lot going on in the investing space, given the change in the economic climate. So, you'll hear all about that from our expert panelists. And speaking of whom, this is who they are. We've got Wendy Hurlburt, Jason Robertson, Jeff Ockerleck, and Anthony Fayas. Now, I'm going to hand over the next hour to the very capable hands of Wendy Hurlburt. She is the president and CEO of LifeSciences BC. Now, LifeSciences BC has been around for a few decades now. It's very uniquely positioned where it knits together the best minds of academia, research, and industry, and working collaboratively so that it really strengthens the whole life science, health tech space. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Wendy. Wendy, you're on.
Thank you. Can you see me?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. Sorry, I couldn't tell from the screen. Thanks very much. I'm thrilled to be here again for VANTEC's focused event on life sciences. And so it's great to be here and great to be here with my fellow panelists who have a lot of insight and expertise in this area. So we hope you'll enjoy this next hour. And I should say, we're going to be able to answer questions. So if you do have some questions, if you could put them in the chat, and I will keep my eyes open for that as we carry on. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining this event from within the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and also would like to acknowledge that others are joining us from across British Columbia and possibly Canada from other gorgeous and unceded territories. I was asked to, in previous years, I've given an overview of the life sciences sector, some of the economic stats, and I was asked this year to talk a little bit about LifeSciences BC and how we support the ecosystem, specifically as it relates to SMEs and some of the activities that we do for that. So LifeSciences BC, for those that do not know, is a not-for-profit, non-governmental industry association that supports and represents the life sciences community in BC through numerous initiatives at the local, national, and international level. We nurture economic development in the province through leadership, facilitation of investment and partnering, advocacy, and then promotion of the sector. So as you probably know, we have our hands in a lot of different pots, and we really work tirelessly every day on behalf of our members to both promote the ecosystem broadly, but also try and advance our members at whatever stage they are at in their company journey. And with that, a couple of things that we've been up to lately. For those of you in the biotech sector, the International Bio Conference is in 2 weeks, I think. And so we are leading a delegation of 25 to 30 companies at Bio. Next week, we have a preview of those companies where I think about 2/3 of the ones that are coming will be presenting in advance of Bio. And the audience is intended, while anybody is able to attend, it really is around trying to get a preview of the BC innovation and the specific companies that are going to be at Bio, so that they can then get ahead of setting up meetings, whether it be about investing, garnering investment, business development deals, licensing, royalties, partnerships, etc. So we have that, and Minister Chow from the BC government will be opening it to talk about BC being open for business from a trade and investment perspective. At Bio, we have a BC Showcase networking event on the Monday evening. If you are at Bio, please let us know. And if you are a company at Bio that we don't know that you're going, please let us know, because we've created a whole program around this, including a booklet that is online with a QR code where the BC companies are profiled. So we are trying desperately to capture everyone that's there. In addition to the Bio conference, we are intending to attend the AdvaMed conference, the MedTech conference in the fall, and we'll lead a similar delegation. So if you're interested in being a part of that, let us know. The nice thing for our members is that even if they're not present, they're always with us, because we promote all of our members and all of the BC ecosystem when we're at these conferences. So we often say our members travel in our suitcase with us, because we have a robust membership directory that we can direct people's attention to. We also have a number of initiatives as it relates to SMEs and trying to really create that connection between investors and partners and our SMEs. So we started a couple of years ago an investor readiness program, which Jason will talk a little bit about because he's a mentor. We matched 10 companies, and actually Anthony was one of our companies. So we matched 10 companies with mentors over essentially a 6-month program. And it culminates with helping the companies figure out their proposition, what is their offering. It's all over the map. We have different educational sessions throughout the 6 months, including peer-to-peer workshops, which seem to have been quite positively received, and culminates in what we refer to as a graduation, but it's essentially an investor conference where we invite a number of investors to come and listen to the 10 companies pitch. At the end of it, a little nerve-wracking maybe for the companies, but Anthony, you can tell us how it felt. They actually get a report card on their pitch, what they did well, and what are some of the areas of opportunities for them as they continue to look ahead. We also run a conference that was probably more better known, Invest in BC. It's in the fall every year. And it is where we run a 2-day conference of approximately 30 to 35 companies across the whole life sciences space that pitch to what has become, since COVID commenced, a very internationally focused conference. I think it has become the largest early stage life sciences investor conference in Canada. Last year we had 350 attendees, of which they were from 100 different countries. 32 different countries, 100 people that identified as investors, and 85 that identified as government officials, which are essentially trade commissioners, whether they be Canadian trade commissioners in region in other areas or other countries' trade commissioners. Last year, we had representatives from every continent around the world, with the exception of Antarctica. So we have a running joke about trying to get someone or a penguin from Antarctica to attend this year, but we'll see how that goes. In addition to those, we've run a number of different events, webinars, roundtables that are really focused on those things that are important to the sector, whether they be issues that we're trying to address or enablers that we're trying to advance. So we have an event called Career Connect Day in January. Again, we did it virtually this year. The focus is around profiling careers in life sciences, trying to get companies in front of prospective employees, get prospective employees in front of companies, and profile the breadth of careers that exist in life sciences, trying to bridge that business and science gap that sometimes exists in our sector. We believe it's become the largest life sciences career-focused event because we had 875 registrants from, again, around the world that are all interested in coming and working in BC or working for BC-based companies. In addition to that, we have our Access to Innovation Conference, which is largely policy, latest scientific discovery, issue-focused, and then numerous events throughout the year where we basically bring the community together and have addressed topics of interest. We've done a deep dive into the radiopharmaceutical space. We've talked about clinical trials and reform, and the list is very broad. So that's us in a nutshell. In addition, we work very closely with the government on life sciences related initiatives. and advocate for things to happen on behalf of the sector. Like a couple of years ago, we released the first economic report with the government on what the life sciences sector was in British Columbia. So that's us in a nutshell. We exist on behalf of our members and because of our members. So we really appreciate everybody that does join us, and we're always, welcoming new members. So if you're interested, let us know. And with that rapid fire, Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you to maybe give your perspective as both being an IRP, but also being part of the IRP program, but also you have an interesting lens on what's happening in the life sciences sector right now from an investment perspective.
No, thanks, Wendy. I really appreciate that. So I think for the benefit of those on the call who may not know, just briefly, Nimbus is the leader in early stage health technology investments in Canada, and I have the immense privilege of leading our investment team. With that privilege comes the pleasure of having been a mentor now for 2 years with the IRP program. And I think, for those, most of you, I think here are very well versed on what a strong and supportive early stage, innovation ecosystem that we have here. And I think, IRP plays a part. I think there's a number of different, constituents and players that are all supportive in that space. But for me, it's really interesting to see, I do, mentor at UBC as well as, entrepreneurship at UBC, as well as at Creative Destruction Labs. And so, IRP, I think, fills a really interesting niche and spot for innovative life sciences companies where, oftentimes, someone, dare I say, someone like Anthony or another innovator, may have a discovery or an idea that comes out from some of their research in academia and whatnot, and has decided that they want to maybe look to see if that's a commercializable idea and sort of in a sort of maybe a slightly backwards fashion, sort of match up a solution and a technology with a particular problem, which is its own sort of unique skill set. And so, UBC does a great job of sort of helping, early stage innovators understand what that challenge is, for instance. But once, they sort of have decided that they want to pursue their entrepreneurial journey and capitalize on this innovation and try to commercialize it, then comes a challenge that we, I think, are all here to support, which is typically the investing, the financing, of those innovations. And so, I think the challenge with some of those programs is you spend a lot of time trying to understand what your business is. Once you've progressed and you've started maybe bringing on a small team and, you've taken care of your IP and some of these other areas, then the challenge becomes, how do I present my company to the world? And I think, one of the misconceptions that early innovators and entrepreneurs often have, I think, is that process is either quick or it's linear. And it really isn't. And so I think the benefit of something like IRP, where it sort of has this 6-month breadth with a lot of education and a lot of mentor support, is building a story, a pitch deck, a presentation, a narrative around what your venture is trying to accomplish and achieve takes time. And you need to be able to soundboard it and test it and see how it resonates and make tweaks and make changes. And ideally do that in a safe space with people who understand and have experience in what good presentations and good stories sound like, and can provide constructive feedback, so that you're not necessarily having to game day test it when you are pitching your first suite of investors, right? And so I think it's done a tremendous job. And so my hat tip to Wendy and the team for putting the program together, and I think filling what is a very important spot in that value chain. I think that brings to your second point, Wendy. We're at a very interesting time, and I think a lot of the individuals on this webinar in this session, are feeling that there's a lot of tumultuousness going on in the public markets. I think we all intuitively understand that what happens in those public markets affects the private markets and the early stage innovation ecosystem. And so making sure that whether it's IRP or otherwise, we're spending time with those early stage innovators to help them understand, because oftentimes they are domain experts in whatever it is that they are doing. They're not necessarily financial experts. They're not business building experts necessarily. And so the complexities of where we find ourselves in the economic cycle right now is a bit unknown and a bit foreign to them. So I think, whether at IRP or otherwise, I think it's a really interesting time that we find ourselves in. And so to your point, Wendy, we are spending a lot of time right now with our companies. And I think the greatest saying I've heard recently that I like to sort of steal and pair it out is much of what happened during the start of the COVID crisis was a dress rehearsal for, I think, where we're going to find ourselves in today. I think a lot of the advice and guidance and concern and apprehension that happened at the start of COVID, when sort of markets crashed and things tumbled and there was a lot of uncertainty around where the future would go, I think we were all, I think it's fair to say, surprised by the robustness of certainly the public markets and policy response from governments to sort of prop up markets. But I think now there's definitely the feeling amongst certainly the institutional investors that this time is different and that it will be a protracted sort of longer period. So as an innovator, what does that mean to you? How do you think about ensuring that you are being mindful of your milestones that you want to achieve, the cost and the capital and expense required to get there? And then on the investor side, for the angels, how do you think about supporting your portfolio companies and those that you choose to invest in? And given some of the frostiness over the last couple of years, how do you make sure that the things that you participate in are going to continue to benefit you on a return spectrum that is meet your expectations?
Thanks, Jason. I'm going to ask you to unpack that just a bit more with a specific question, but then Anthony, I'm going to turn to you because as the SME in the room that was recently raising capital, you probably have a bit of a perspective. And so, Jason, the question I want to ask you to unpack a little bit is, the last couple of years, as you said, have been a little bit unique. And, I hesitate to use the word boom, but let's just say that. And so, some people I've heard say, we always used to talk about capital and capital is not a problem anymore. And now talent is what we really need to focus on. And I think that statement of capital may not be a problem really depends on where you sit in this ecosystem right now. So could you unpack that a little bit about how the last few years have unfolded? Because I think some people are feeling we're in good shape and others are feeling we've come to a grinding halt somehow.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question, Wendy. So I'll try to expound a little bit on it. I think there's a couple of facets that I want to touch on, and I think a couple of the other panelists will have some good insights here as well. One of the things that I've been mindful of in my discourse with peers and other sort of constituents within our Canadian ecosystem is I think there's a bit of a and noting the Bank of Canada's rate hike today, I think there's a bit of a lagging awareness around what is happening right now in the U.S. innovative tech space, primarily around, while there aren't necessarily the big splashy, front page news articles yet, the discussions at the board levels around, some of the highest flying tech startups that we all know of, household names, is very much ones around working through strategic plans around, massive OpEx reduction, right? Not necessarily, we've heard some early, we've seen some early signs of some of those, whether it's Netflix and others, but really setting the stage for saying, look, to your point, Wendy, capital is not free anymore. It is not necessarily as easy to get as it historically was, though I look at Jeff and Anthony, and I don't think either one of them would ever say that it's easy. It's never easy, but certainly maybe not as easy. And moving forward, it's certainly going to be more difficult, regardless of the challenges historically. And so I think there's certainly that element to it, and so I think we run the risk as Canadian leaders within the innovation space that if we're not being equally thoughtful around how do we maintain and manage our companies and our OPEX and our burn effectively, and set reasonable goals and expectations to where we need to get to, we run the risk of finding ourselves left out, and the hurdles that these innovators are going to need to achieve to be funded in the future are just going to be much more difficult to obtain. I think the other thing that I'm really mindful of, and again, I think it's a good point that we talked about is, I think a lot of the folks here will recognize that the statistics around how much funding has come into venture capital, especially in the last year, unprecedented new funds, unprecedented amount of capital. But what we're hearing, amongst our peers, is that the limited partners that fund those VCs, right? Typically big institutions, fund-to-fund managers, billions of assets under management, because they are tied a lot of their investments to the public markets, have seen these massive markdowns in their investments in the public markets. And consequently, they're all sort of balanced in terms of their asset allocations. And consequently, they're telling their VC fund managers, do not call capital. And so you have this disconnect where, you're looking on paper and it's like, hey, there's all this funding, there's all this capital available to me, there's all these VCs with all this money. But those VCs actually don't have any money. They have commitments, but they can't call those commitments from their LPs right now. And so, it is something that at least hopefully won't progress. I mean, obviously that capital has been committed. At some point, those fund managers will be able to call that capital, and more will come back into VC. But at least in the foreseeable future, it's going to be very challenging. And I suspect that when we get the numbers coming in from Q2, you're going to see a plummeting of deals having been done compared to Q1, especially. So definitely, it's an interesting time. I think there is light, but I think in the immediacy, it is very challenging, and the numbers from last year don't give credit to what's happening on the ground.
Thank you, Jason. That's great perspective. And just so that we don't, get into a place of a lot of doom and gloom, I'm going to ask Anthony to talk about his recent experiences in raising capital and as a SME out there.
Yeah, I'm certainly not an expert at it, but I'm very happy to say that we have basically completed our funding round. One of our board members is somewhere in the audience, and I haven't even told him yet, but we received all of our closing book documents today. So we're very happy that we're on track. And from that perspective, I guess we timed it well, finishing last month. I have recently seen some of the doom and gloom show up with stuff like the Y Combinator letter that went out that said, everybody should hunker down and not be looking for a lot of capital if you don't need to. But I think we're in a good position, and we have enough to get us through to the end of next year, which should be long past our MVP. So from that perspective, I think we're in good shape. I don't really know. I guess I can't really say too much about where things are going now. It's just the word is slowly getting out that it's going to be harder. But as you pointed out, Wendy, it's really hard to say that it was easy before. I don't think fundraising is ever really easy. But the IRP was actually a great experience, and we sort of were fortunate. We were riding on the crest every time there was another seminar on a topic. It was like perfectly timed for us, or maybe like 2 days late, perhaps sometimes. I think we had our term sheet signed, and then like 2 weeks later, we did the session on how to sign a term sheet. So, not everything worked out perfectly in terms of timing, but the community was fantastic, and everything came together really well for us. So at this point, we're just very fortunate to be in the right position at the right time, which I guess is kind of the surprise, because starting a company in the pandemic fully remotely, nobody would have said that's the best time, but you never know how fortune's going to turn out.
I hope in the term sheet education session, you debunked any myths that people were presenting, considering you had real life recent experience. So Jeff, I thought I'd turn to you. You wear so many hats in this sector. So in light of this position of where we are, which of course is not all doom and gloom, what does that mean to investors, angel investors, other investors, as to what they should be looking at as they're investing? And really what I'm talking about is this horizon of short, mid, long term, where a lot of the innovation in the life sciences sector is long haul innovation, so to speak.
Yeah, so you probably saw from my bio and what Wendy said, I have a short attention span. I've never figured out what I want to do when I grow up. And that's why I bounced around so many different things. So having been in the roughly medical device space now for 40 years, I've seen markets go up, down, sideways, in, out, explode, crash, do everything else. And quite frankly, it's really never been that big a deal for the companies I've been involved with in fundraising. Sometimes it takes a little longer, sometimes it's a little harder, but it's always hard to add to what Anthony said. Someday I'm going to find something that's easy to raise money for. I haven't found it yet. I think in a lot of ways, you know, anything to do with healthcare is a little bit immune to the usual vagaries of the marketplace. You know, we're not talking typically about what's the word, disposable income, optional purchases. We're talking about stuff that people really, really need. And people get sick. I mean, and when you need healthcare, you need a medical device, when you need a new drug, you will pay for it. It doesn't matter what the public markets are doing at any particular time. So in that sense, I think a lot of healthcare investments are a little bit less subject, not entirely not subject, but less subject to, you know, the ups and downs of the marketplace. There is, you know, we're entering a period clearly where I think startups in particular have to be a little bit careful. One of the things that, you know, that I've seen over the last couple of years is I saw a lot of organizations that where their valuation got way ahead, you know, way ahead of the curve. You know, they raised a lot of money on what seemed to be a rather eyebrow-raising valuation. I think they might be in trouble in the coming years if they need more money, because they're going to have to suffer a serious down round or something like that. But just in one of the breakout groups, I had a brief conversation with Jeff Hansen, who's always the voice of reason and calm. And he pointed out that, you know, the funds are still going to be deployed. They're going to be deployed to quality investments. Perhaps things will take a little bit longer. There'll be more questions asked. So stretch out your funds a bit longer, bootstrap a little bit longer, just expect things to take more time. Then the money will still be deployed. It's not going to go away. You know, it's due respect to Jason's better understanding of what's actually going on in some of the funds, but there is still money being deployed and will be deployed, and it will be seeking quality investments that have a market independent likelihood of return, which to me means healthcare as being one of the target areas. So if you can bootstrap, if you can stretch things out a little bit longer, probably good advice, but there's probably still money out there if you have a good idea and a chance to go out. And I'll end with just never forget what Guy Kawasaki says: sales fixes everything. If you can get to the point where you have some revenue, then everything changes. Everything changes quite quickly. And I know that's hard for drug discovery, but for medical devices, just find a way to get your minimally viable product in the market and get some revenue coming in to prove you're in the right place, and things will become quite a bit easier.
Maybe I can just riff on Jeff for a half second and just sort of add, sorry, Wendy, just quickly that I think Jeff makes a really interesting perspective. And I think that's the benefit of this community here with life sciences, you know, especially with like Anthony and, you know, others on the primarily the drug development side, you know, that tends to not necessarily be as influenced by the macroeconomic perspective. I think those investors are constantly investing, you know, throughout the cycles. And in fact, I think the opportunity for all investors, not just, you know, those in life sciences, is that, you know, as we see perhaps, you know, what some, you know, forecast or foreshadow is sort of, you know, perhaps, you know, changes around talent and you know, perhaps, you know, layoffs and whatnot, is the opportunity for young innovative companies to pick up much needed talent that has been traditionally difficult and expensive to get. And so I think that is the opportunity, you know, in front of us. You know, and I think the other area that Jeff really, you know, I want to double click on for everyone's benefit is, you know, health remains one of the last, you know, sort of, I don't want to say it's not blue ocean, but sort of remains one of the last unsolved pieces of the innovation, you know, of innovation, where there's just so many challenges that need to be solved in health. I mean, not that there aren't in you know, business, you know, building use cases, but, you know, there's so much innovation in Zoom and Slack and all these sort of things. We don't have that commensurate innovation yet having happened in health. And so I think when you look at where health or you know, investment dollars in general are going, it's to health, because there's still so many problems that need to be solved.
I think that's a great point, and was going to lead me to another question, which is around, so at a minimum, there's going to be increased competition for capital. To your point, the capital will continue to flow. Maybe you stretch it longer. Let's maybe turn to the investor side. So I may go back to you, Jeff, and then is around, so if you're sitting as an investor knowing all of this, knowing what your companies are being told, where there's so much, to Jason's point, there's so much innovation in this space, and a lot of really good innovation, some that has shorter term potential sales, which are, of course, are your friends' sales, and some which are longer. Where would you look right now to make your investments?
Well, yeah, so now you're asking me to take off my hat and put on my investor.
Yeah, you're putting on your other hat. This is the point. So, you have all these hats.
You know, it always comes back to quality, and you know, investors are always looking for quality, of course. But if I was to choose what I would invest at in my space, which is medical devices, I would be looking for companies that have the shortest route to getting those first sales and getting revenue to prove their market. So if it, you know, companies that are very early stage and saying we've got a lot of lab work, and you know, 2 or 3 years from now we may know whether this is going to actually work, might be less inclined to go after. My apologies to any companies pitching today that have a 5-year, you know, plan, but if I was investing personally, I'd be looking for ones where I say I can see how you can get that into the hands of customers, into the hands of patients in a few years' time. So that shorter cycle is one of the things I look for. Mm-hmm. That said, that's always, you know, adjusted by the size of the opportunity and how exciting the technology is and what an impact it's going to have. So it's not a hard and fast rule if I want a quick return. It's going to be balanced by how big a deal is this. So.
And it's quite different in the space that you're operating in, Anthony, because you wouldn't be able to, Jeff isn't the person you're calling. What's the feedback you were getting from investors as you were talking to them and them looking at, you know, your innovation pathway?
Yeah, actually, this is the one case in which I don't think I can argue with Jeff at all. We've also heard the same thing. People are really interested in what we're doing because we do also have a short runway. And a lot of people have been saying, like, all these companies that have a 20-year timeline to get to the market, they have to go through the FDA trials and all that. I mean, that's a really difficult path for investors because there's just so much capital involved in many rounds, and it's going to take a long time to get there. Mm-hmm. And for our plan, we explicitly set out to come up with a way of getting ourselves to market faster, hopefully getting revenue for us even the next 6 months. We expect to start being able to get ourselves to market. So I totally agree that short timeline is a big deal. But I do have one thing I wanted to add, and I think this goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, about capital being sort of under increased competition. And I guess my concern is that we're also at the same time going to see valuations drop a little bit, particularly if there's a lot less money sloshing around. In California, for instance, when the money is sloshing, the valuations go way up. And that actually means that companies can get a little bit more funds in the door, and that helps them build longer runways. With tightening valuations, that means that companies are going to have lower valuations and lower amounts of money coming in. And that means that this is actually going to be a more difficult time to, I guess, get Canadian companies up and running. It'll be a little bit easier in the States as before. Money may not be sloshing, but there'll be at least larger valuations and longer runways. And as Canadians, I think we have to be aware of that. The shorter valuations also give us shorter runways. Mm-hmm. So we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I think, you know, Jason, I'd like you to now comment a little bit on, as you look around the BC and, you know, specifically, I guess, Vancouver environment, we have a number of innovators that actually almost do fit that bill. I mean, you know, nothing's guaranteed, but where you see some of the health tech innovation, and some would say we get de-risked in some of this health technology strength that we really have in Vancouver.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's an interesting, you know, insight, Wendy. You know, when we look at, I think really the theme of this meeting today in terms of the convergence is tech. I think we've been advocates from day one of our founding that the BC ecosystem in particular is uniquely situated at this sort of intersection between traditional life sciences and really interesting tech and deep tech, type innovations, whether it's, stuff like D-Wave and lots of the, quantum stuff. But when you sort of take that ecosystem, it just seems obvious that it's going to interact and overlap, and the concentric, sort of circles and Venn diagrams are going to be there. And so you're going to end up with incredible things like H2O and like Claris and others, that are sort of taking, insights from the traditional tech ecosystem, using the best of tech and ML and AI, and sort of leveraging that into traditionally health-centric problems that need to get solved. And so I think we're sort of at that nascent stage. But you look at someone like H2O, where you're fundamentally coming at a problem and saying, look, the sort of software or algorithms or approaches, computational approaches that we've typically taken for drug discovery, all stem from algorithms that were developed decades ago. They weren't optimized for current hardware capabilities. And so how do we think about redesigning those calculations and computations for what we carry around in our pockets, which is supercomputers effectively. So I think we see a lot of that, and so I think whether it's in computational drug discovery like H2O, whether it's in medical imaging, AI images and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of really interesting innovation going on. And I suspect that as we have more anchor companies, both on the traditional life sciences side, like AbCellera, of course, and Zymeworks and others, which also have their own, computational underpinnings, that we're going to see a really interesting breadth, I think, of new innovators and new startup companies that I think we should all be really excited about.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is one of the very uniquenesses of the life sciences sector. As you say, this convergence of tech. We've had a strong tech sector. I often say that's also why we have a strong digital health sector, because of our strength in the gaming industry for years. And uniquely, we seem to have always, been, or at least are very strong right now in bringing cross-disciplinary science together. So what I mean by that is chemistry meets physics, or biology meets mechanical engineering. And so with that, and with our ecosystem that is uniquely sized, that we can all be, meet each other and share that knowledge. We have a wonderful culture in the life sciences sector in British Columbia about supporting each other, sharing information with each other. That does, outside of the headwinds that Jason is talking about, and I stand corrected. Jason says, Anthony, that you should call Jeff. So, so call Jeff. But outside of that, maybe Jeff, you can comment on it using one of your other broader hats of, when you look at BC, how is the BC and Vancouver ecosystem well positioned to weather what we've described?
Well, whenever I turn over a rock in BC, I find some absolutely phenomenal technology being developed and the companies doing amazing things. And 30 years ago, I was Science Council of BC, for anyone who remembers that. And these applications would come in from local companies where you're going like, I had no idea that a local company was leading the world in this and this and this. And that has grown and grown and grown over the years, to the point where it just seems like a weekly thing now here about somebody doing something absolutely amazing. A lot of it being driven by the strength of our two main universities and BCIT in Vancouver area. Obviously across the rest of the province, there's some great institutions as well. But the level of leading technology that's coming out of the labs in our universities is astounding. Just blows my mind on a regular basis. And The other thing that I'll jump on what you said is this idea that the cross-disciplinary projects are the ones that I've always found most fascinating. As you say, you know, a physicist finds a biologist, finds a medical doctor, and suddenly something really incredible comes out. And to me, that's where where the really exciting stuff is coming from, is where we crossbreed, across different disciplines. And that's always been true, but is even more true now. And those opportunities are really important, and I'm glad to see they're being encouraged by various organizations here. Before we move on, though, I just want to back up to something that Anthony was talking about. Anthony, you mentioned valuations. Being able to get a higher valuation when the markets are frothy, and that starting to sense my teeth on edge, because that's that dangerous thing. And it's. I'm among the crowd for many years who've always whined and complained about how, valuations for companies in Vancouver, we get a way higher valuation if we're in the valley, for the same thing. And now we're going to enter a phase where we're going to say, oh, thank goodness we didn't get ourselves overvalued during that frothy period where people were throwing money all over the place. A methodical, steady growth in your value is much better than having a massive spike in it and then having to have a massive down round and upset all your early investors and the like. Had to do that. Doesn't, it's no fun at all. Don't want to do it again, where we had to recapitalize a company. And that's an awful thing and really painful for all the investors. I would much prefer not to use the overinflation of the market as an excuse to drive the valuation up beyond where it should be for the stage that we are at and the depth you're at. Keep investing at an appropriate stage so that you have room to move up the ramp rather than getting convinced to drive it up too fast. And yeah, it looks very attractive. And somebody says, well, I'm going to, give you some huge valuation here. Wow, I'm doing so great. Well, 2 years later, you may find that was a serious mistake. And I've seen that happen, and it's not pleasant. So
I'm just going to riff on you, Jeff, if I can, which I 150% agree with you. And I think that's, I look at the Canadian and the BC ecosystem in particular, and I think there are numerous examples where I hope in retrospect, people will look favorably on having not gotten over their skis on valuation and having to come to terms with that. That said, I do want to reinforce, I think, Anthony, I share your concern, which is that, one of the things we've seen, across the portfolio is, and I think, even regardless of the uncertainty ahead of us, it will likely persist and continue in some measured way, is the significant inflation of salaries, right? And so when we're talking about convergence of technologies and convergence of solutions into new innovations, right, that means that we are going to be requiring talent from a historically and continually expensive area vis-a-vis tech, right? And so if you need a data scientist for your particular, venture, that is a $200,000 a year plus probably role. And so, we can't fund, ecosystem participants or startups, to the perhaps same degree that we have historically and expect similar results. And so I think, Anthony does have a point that there has to be some fluidity in the conversation between investors and entrepreneurs to say, look, for you to, accomplish what we have historically expected you to accomplish in whatever that period of time is, 12, 24 months, instead of $1 million, it's now going to cost you, $2 million. And the talent mix is going to be slightly different, but you may not necessarily get any further for the basis of that money. But if I, as an investor, am going to give you more money, I have to somehow be mindful that the dilutionary aspect of that comes into play. And so, there is a balance there. I agree with you, Jeff. I mean, I think we're all going to be really thankful in the future that we didn't have the same, dare I say, mania that we've seen down south. But at the same time, I do still think that as participants here in BC, we do need to shift our mindset a little bit and understand what those use of proceeds are and support our entrepreneurs.
Well,
I think it's a really good point. And actually, I was going to turn to you, Anthony, because I wanted to ask you, and there's two elements that we've just been talking about that I think where you sit in this ecosystem, you can provide some great insight. I think one of them is around getting, going backwards a bit to this convergence of science coming together with, computational drug discovery is, two fields coming together, which on the one hand is super exciting, as we're all saying, and we all believe a unique strength of BC. But as you're talking to, people that were typically investing in drug discovery that might have been investing in people that were in labs, and now it's, to Jason's point, a different skill set. It's a bit of a different business model, but it's also a bit of a different challenge as you're trying to scale your company, as you look at what can I use my funds for and how expensive is the talent and where am I going to find it?
I may have missed part of the question in there.
It's really around, did you have a different experience being your type of company, raising funds and needing to demonstrate how these funds were going to be used in a manner that might have been untraditional because you're this science coming together? And then secondly, the pressure on talent.
Yeah. I guess the first part of it is, did we expect a completely different experience? For sure. If you look at some of the other companies who are launching, you see a couple out there that are raising $50 million to get launched. And, we're not in that space. We figured we could get away with about $1 million, maybe $1.5 million in that range. We said, that's what we'll go ask for a first round. We call it a pre-seed because it's not even a seed round for a lot of these companies who in the wet lab would be raising upwards of $50 to $100 million to get their first round out the door. So for sure, the technology gives you, it's sort of cutting a double-edged sword, right? You have the opportunity to raise less funds to get yourself bootstrapped and up, but at the same time, you're also now trying to work on the bootstrapping side, and you have a lot less funds that you can go crazy with in the beginning. And of course, that really speaks to the talent you can bring in. One of our first things that we tried to do is bring in a couple of Americans to come work for us, and they all asked for roughly 2 to 3 times the salary that a Canadian would accept for the same position. And that puts everybody in a really awkward position. We'd like to hire the best talent to make sure that our company grows the best we can, but we can't afford it because we're not raising these huge amounts to do it. So it's exactly what we were talking about. If the valuations are lower, you have less access to the world talent. And in the end, we had to come back and say, look, we're a Canadian company. We'll do this the Canadian way. We'll hire Canadians and we'll focus on that side of it. And we just don't look to hire Americans at this point because we just can't access that talent pool. Would we do something completely different to get there? Possibly, but that again would require us to go off and look for a frothy valuation. And that was never our point either. We didn't want to do that. And I was also not advocating for frothy valuations. I'm just saying that given a company in Vancouver and a company in San Francisco, the company in San Francisco is going to launch out the door with 3 to 4 million, and the Canadian company is going to launch with 1 million. And that just changes the access to the talent pool, who you're working with, and how big of that network you can access in the beginning. So there's differences. We're a Canadian company. We'll follow the Canadian pathway. And being in the space where you're working on both the computer side and the biology side, we have to focus on the stuff that's tractable. And for what we've raised, the biology side isn't going to be tractable. We can't go into the lab and do that. So we'll be looking for partners, and we have fantastic access to partners in BC. And hopefully some of those will carry the day, and we'll figure our way to market.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, you were going to add something to that.
Yes, I was just going to say that the thing that keeps me awake at night is not what's going on in the broader market or where the next fund is going to come from. What keeps me awake at night is Amazon or Microsoft coming and talking to my chief developer and saying, we'll triple your salary and give you 10 weeks holiday, and why don't you come and work for us? That's the scariest thing going on in our market right now, is the disruptive pay scales that some of the big players are offering. Now, the good news is that I've talked to numerous software dev guys who've gone and taken that big salary for a couple of years and then said, oh my God, how soon can I go back to a lower salary and do something meaningful? So, I hope it's a short-term thing, but it is a huge threat to startups in particular, because they can, one offer like that can eviscerate a startup, take the key people out, and you're done. So that's what scares me more than the market situation.
And I think that Jason's put a comment in the chat, but that brings us back to almost the beginning of this conversation, which is around how do you capitalize these startups appropriately? Because, on the one hand, we've talked about frothy valuations. On the other hand, we're also talking about, especially organizations like Anthony's, the cost of doing business is a little bit different. The cost of that startup path is a little bit different. And obviously the key asset is, there's IP, but they're the people, and the people that are doing this work. And so I guess, Anthony, I would have a question, because you were talking about not being able to hire Americans and hiring Canadians, and the differential of how much money you would have gone to raise and how many what you would have ended up paying these people. And we'll figure out how to end this on a more positive note. But I'm interested, what would you say the impact of that was for you? Has it significantly changed your ability to, has it slowed the pace down? What sacrifices did you have to make by deciding to say, I'm staying in Canada, I'm staying with this valuation, and I'm now going to hire Canadians?
It was sort of a learning experience for us, because in the beginning, it wasn't really obvious how that would all play out. But we had a couple of positions posted last fall. And once we had the first part of our fund in, we tried to hire, and it took much, much longer to find people. The people we found are fantastic, mostly Canadians, and most of them came in wanting to be here because of the science. So I can't stress enough about how happy I am to work with the people I'm working with. They're fantastic. They're focused on what we're doing. They've bought into what we're doing, and they're not going to be poached by Amazon. I'm pretty sure that someone's not going to come up and offer them more money and they're going to leave. Most of them have had the opportunity to check that out and decided that's not where they want to be. Of course, really the big thing for us is delay. It's harder to find the specialists you need in Canada. They're not just sitting around in the street corner waiting for you to come over and say, hey, you're a nuclear physicist and you work on this area, come work for me because I want to hire you. We have to really take our time to do these job searches and track them down. In the States, you have roughly 10 times the population and there's 10 times as many people, which just makes it, I presume, somewhat easier to find these people that you need for this, that are specialists. And in our case, some of them took a lot longer to find than we wanted. Than we'd hoped, and that really has pushed back, I think, our MVP probably about 6 months from where we anticipated it being, had we managed to bring in those hires earlier.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So as the investors in the room, Jason and Jeff, putting yet another hat back on, how much are you, as you are looking at where you are investing, what are you, as people are raising money, how present right now is this talent scarcity that our SMEs are experiencing impact? Are you understanding that, yes, I mean, per Jason's example, maybe it was $1 million, now it's $2 million because of these factors. As an investor, are you prepared and really, taking that in recognizing that that's the way it is going to be right now?
Jeff, do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Sure. So I mean, yes, we are. I think it's been something that I've foreseen. I think Jeff has been, an ample, mentor to me. I think thinking about what we've seen in terms of, OPEX or salary inflation across the portfolio this past year. Again, I think on average probably over 30%. And you can't look at that, and again, I think. We have just been living in a very unique, asynchronous and not, I don't want to say it sort of arbitrage situation, but we've known for a very long time that salaries in BC in particular are not representative of either the East or down South. And so, the COVID pandemic unlocked the ability for the talent that exists here to find their appropriate value. And so that means now, to Anthony's point, that if we want to, whether it's local talent or remote talent, we need to recognize and start thinking about paying market rates for that talent. And that then means that our startups need to raise appropriate amounts of capital to be able to hire that talent. I do want to say sort of two quick things on that aspect. I think one, I think there's obviously a corollary where to Jeff's point, we do often see talent, even if it does get poached, spin back out of the big players because it's just not exciting work. They just don't love it. Which is great, but it's also, I think, a call, for all the entrepreneurs and innovators in the room, working on their ventures, that you also need to build a compelling culture and a compelling reason for why that talent wants to come back to you. Inevitably, you're not necessarily going to be able to match one-to-one whatever that salary is, and that's okay. Not everyone needs $400,000 a year to survive, and most would be happier to take less and do something meaningful. But you need to create that culture and that environment that compels them to want to invest their time with you. And I think that is something that if you're going to double down on anything in the future, especially with talent being scarce or challenging, it's that will be a key advantage in your toolkit for recruiting talent.
That's a great segue, Jason, because I was immediately going to come up with the culture thing, just exactly as you said, that there are so many factors involved, obviously, but startups are obviously rarely going to be able to pay as much as the top payers in the market. So you have to be able to offer more than that. And that really comes down to, well, as Peter Drucker said back in like 1960, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you have a great culture that really is meaningful for people, they're going to be more willing to take a hit on their potential salary. Now, that's true to a certain extent, but we are talking about trying to live in Vancouver. And, it's hard enough to pay, your $4,000 a month for a little studio apartment and rent. But now the cost of everything else is going up as well. And whereas, it might have been acceptable to take a hit on your salary in the past, this is going to get more and more difficult to sustain as inflation starts eating, a larger and larger piece of people's paychecks. So it is a concern. But, I do believe, and once again, this is something that's particular about healthcare, is that it's much easier to find real meaning in what you're doing. It's one of those areas of endeavor where you can do well by doing good. And I always tell the story of a fellow who came and joined my company from Electronic Arts. And I said, why would you come to a little, 6-person startup where I can't guarantee that we have enough cash to pay you on Friday? And he said, well, at EA, I'm designing, more realistic blood splatters and some shoot 'em up game. And here I could save somebody's life. Well, say no more. I mean, he got the culture, he got the why behind what we were doing. And that was enough to motivate him to move into a high risk startup area. Now, he did very well from it. So, I mean, in the end, no complaints. But,
that again brings back that convergence of science and technology that is so unique to our sector because of some strengths that people have been able to take complementary skills over. So as we are about to wrap up, I think we've covered a wide range of topics. We've covered, macroeconomic environment, specifically the perspectives of what's happening if you're sitting as an investor, as a SME, talking about talent, which is critically important. To bring us back to the topic and hopefully end this on a relatively positive note, we were talking about transition of convergence of technology, which I think we very aptly identified as one of our great strengths in BC, which, is amazing. And so I'm going to ask each of you to have a parting thought. Anthony, if I can start with you as the convergence of technology company sitting at the table, some thoughts as you look ahead. Are you feeling optimistic? Are you, or what advice would you give to people that are attending this right now?
Advice is always difficult. I was joking earlier about Batman being at the table of the Avengers and sort of the junior partner in the room. So advice is probably pretty limited, but definitely I'm optimistic about the future. I think that BC is probably one of the best places to be. I worry about things like high rent and the competition poaching employees for sure. But at the same time, we also have a culture here that's really hard to beat. We have endless things for people to do and lots of reasons for people to want to be here. And that's what drives up the price of real estate, is because people do want to be here. So it's a double-edged sword, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere else than BC. I came back from the Bay Area to do this because I wanted to be here. I think that also reflects in the people who have joined H2O and have moved to BC as well. So I'm super happy to be here.
That's fantastic. Jason, do you want to add any thoughts, either advice or thoughts of the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just sort of throw out quickly the cliche, that I think, crisis brings opportunity. We can point to all the data, around the .com or the financial crisis at some of the best, returning and sort of household names that we, chat about today came out of those difficult times. So I think there's a lot of, and as we've talked about here, and I'll double down on, I think health remains one of the most intriguing verticals and sectors to focus on from an innovative capacity that needs, change. I think the thoughtfulness for all of us in the room, whether it's innovator or investor, is just to be mindful, of how you think about going around and building your company right now, and how do you make sure you position yourself to take advantage of the opportunities. What is the quote? Luck, favors the prepared, right? So to the degree that you can get your house in order and work with your advisors and your investors and your teams, to be positioned for those opportunities when they come up. I think we'll see a lot of positive in the future.
And Jeff, you get the final word.
Yeah, so I mean, markets go up and markets come down and all sorts of things go on, but just keep your head down, focus on serving a real need, do something that's worthwhile and valuable, do a very good job of it, and you'll come through. You'll be fine.
And I think have fun.
That's a good point. Enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what's fantastic about the sector. We're solving real world problems that have a need. And, there's a lot of meaning in being able to work in this sector. There's easier places to be, but I think I've spent a long time in this sector, and everyone is motivated by trying to, solve real world health problems. And Vancouver is extremely well positioned to be doing that. We've proven that to the world over the last 2 years, and we will continue to do so. And with that, thank you very much, Anthony, Jason, and Jeff. It's always fun. And I'm going to turn it back to the VANTEC team.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much, Wendy, Jason, Jeff, and Anthony. Give a big shout out to them. They did a wonderful job.